What are the basic elements of the Obama administration's approach to missile defense?
Well, in September 2009, President Obama laid out a new vision for European missile defense called the European Phase Adaptive Approach, or EPAA. And what the EPAA is a set of capabilities that will be deployed in an evolutionary manner as the threat evolves. And it will be the U.S. contribution to the NATO missile defense system that was agreed at the 2010 NATO Lisbon Summit. Now, the EPAA consists of three phases. The first phase, which was completed at the end of 2011, called for the deployment of a missile defense radar in Turkey, supplemented by Aegis ballistic missile defense capable ships deployed in the Eastern Mediterranean. The second phase, which we completed construction at the end of 2015, calls for the deployment of an Aegis ashore site in Romania, and that will become operational later this year. The third phase of the EPAA, which will become operational in 2018, calls for the deployment of a second Aegis ashore site in Poland, and we will begin construction later this year on the site in Poland. In addition to those three phases, this EPAA will be supplemented by Aegis ships, 4 of which have been forward deployed at the U.S. naval base in Rota, Spain.
So does NATO have the capability or the intent to threaten Russia and its nuclear deterrent with its missile defense program?
I would say the United States and NATO have made clear over 20 years that U.S. and NATO missile defenses are not directed against Russia, nor do they have the technical capability to impact Russia's strategic deterrent. Indeed, both the United States and NATO have put on the table numerous proposals for missile defense cooperation and transparency with Russia, but unfortunately Russia walked away from those discussions in 2012.
Okay, great. So the missile defense program is aimed at what countries and what threats?
The missile defense program, both the U.S. and NATO missile defense systems, are aimed at threats from outside the Euro-Atlantic region.
So does this Iranian nuclear agreement mean that the Western approach to ballistic missile defense is no longer necessary?
Well, what I would say is the Iran nuclear agreement, if fully implemented, will thankfully cut off Iran's path to a nuclear weapon. And we are hopeful that Iran will meet its obligations under the agreement. However, the deal does not address some of Iran's other disturbing behavior, such as its continued development in testing and deployment of ballistic missiles. And I would say even conventionally armed ballistic missiles can have strategic consequences. Therefore, as long as the U.S., our friends and allies and partners are face the threat of ballistic missile attack, we will work with them to defend against that threat, including through ballistic missile defense.
What is your assessment of Russian compliance with conventional nuclear arms control agreements?
Well, I would say that with regards to the new Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty signed between President Obama and then President Medvedev in 2010, Russia is complying with its obligations. For example, despite the downturn in our bilateral relations, inspections under the New START Treaty, both in Russia and the United States, continue. We continue to exchange notifications on the movement of our strategic forces as required by the treaty. And thirdly, the Bilateral Consultative Commission, which was established by the treaty, continues to meet and work through difficult implementation issues. However, things are not as rosy with regards to Russia's compliance with the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty. The Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty prohibits the United States and Russia from developing or testing ground-launched cruise missiles or ground-launched ballistic missiles with a range of between 500 and 5,500 kilometers. In July of 2014, the United States declared Russia in non-compliance of its obligations not to test a cruise missile with a range of between 500 and 5,500 kilometers. Since then, we have been engaged in diplomacy with Russia with the objective of trying to bring Russia back into compliance with its obligations under the treaty in a verifiable manner. Unfortunately, to date, our diplomatic efforts have been unsuccessful, and we are beginning to look at military options to deny Russia any benefit from its violation. However, I want to say a couple of points. One, we don't want to get into an action-reaction cycle with Russia. Number two, we've made no final decisions on military options. And number three, and this is important, and important to our partners here in Germany, and that is this. The INF Treaty is not simply a bilateral U.S.-Russia arms control agreement. It is fundamentally about Euro-Atlantic security. And we believe that it is in the interest of the United States, Russia, and our NATO allies to have continued adherence to the INF Treaty. So I want to close by saying we have not given up on diplomacy. We are going to continue to engage Russia and others, but to date, our diplomatic efforts have not bore much fruit, but we have not given up.
Wonderful. Assistant Secretary of State Frank Rose, thank you very much for coming.
Great.